Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
Nice to meet you, Ted.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So, Ted, why don't you, so we started now. Why don't you give our viewers and our listeners a little bit of background on yourself?
Okay, sure. I'm like a lot of people my age group, I have been interested in the JFK assassination. Had just turned 8 years old when it happened. Remember watching that Sunday when Jack Ruby killed Oswald in the basement of the Dallas City jail. And that stuff, for some reason, just stuck with me. It seemed unbelievable then, and it seems even more unbelievable now. Yeah. So in my background, I became a journalist, and since I taught at a university until I retired just recently. And so now I'm really into I wanted to kind of really get into doing a lot of mini docs in order to really help improve the understanding of exactly what happened around the JFK assassination, especially in the years leading up to it, when the CIA had almost no oversight. And most people, I think, and reasonably so, don't realize that, what had happened in the world during the 1950s and early 60s, where we had the Congo, and we had Iran, and we had Guatemala, and we had all of these other actually democratically elected governments that were overthrown really by the CIA and on behalf of business interests, really, more than anything else. So that's what really got me excited about it. And I've actually been, studying it for the JFK assassination for about 40 years. So I think we're on the cusp, potentially, of really having a good 2026. I believe that there is some material that's going to come out in this coming year. I believe at some point over the next 3 to 4 years, the CIA is going to actually come up with a story that it was a limited hangout. There was people associated with their Western Hemisphere, Mexico City offices were out of control, and they're going to say that it was just a few rogue elements in the CIA that were associated with it. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. It's been fun for me to actually have the time to spend working on this subject that I've, just been mesmerized with, all of my life.
So, Ted, love your research. Love your YouTube channel. Been going through it. Fantastic stuff. One of the things you said there about the regime changes going on across all over the world. Professor Paul Blow, who we had on our show, he always talks about the JFK assassination as being one of those regime changes. And when you think about it, who was the guy that was involved? The guys that were involved in all that would have been, well, Allen Dulles would have been the guy that started all, and then you have William Harvey, James Angleton, David Atlee Phillips, people like that. And one of the things that came out recently with the documents is William Harvey using fake FAA credentials to travel within the United States, which is key when you know what happened, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy wanted him fired. They send him to Rome. Richard Helms sends him there to protect him. And here's Harvey's meeting with Johnny Roselli, and then he gets the fake FAA credentials. Mark Wyatt, a witness, puts Harvey on a plane going to Dallas a couple weeks before. And on your channel, you did a great episode about, was there a command center set up in Dallas? And was William Harvey the guy that set that up at a place called Collins Radio, which is an interesting thing. So if you want to talk about that, because I totally agree with you on Harvey, but let's talk about the command center, and let's get into Collins Radio, and we'll talk about the Matter story because that ties into the whole thing. But let's start with Harvey and setting up a command center.
I've always believed that there had to be some kind of a command center set up in Dallas that weekend. And I think what really put me over the top as far as believing that is watching the dark complected man sitting on the curb next to Umbrella Man, which to me, it looks pretty much like a military grade radio. And I have a lot of trouble understanding how people can't see that. It seems so obvious. The other photos where he's walking away and in his back, it's almost assured that he's got, something jammed in there. So that's what really got me thinking about it. The travel documents of William K. Harvey, and as you mentioned, Sean, you're right on target there. I mean, this is a guy that Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy both wanted to have fired. They were kind of talked into letting him, be the station chief in Rome. But, he had such vindictiveness against the Kennedys. And for him to be on that flight to Dallas under an alias when he had no business of being in Dallas, that's really what it comes down to. So what was he doing there? This was a guy that was really, so proficient in setting up assassinations and setting up regime changes that it's almost 1 and 1 equals 2, and I think that's the reason that the CIA, of course, has been so reticent to release his travel documents, as far as how long he was actually in Dallas. My contention is that he was the perfect person to be setting up that what I consider some kind of a communications command center. Now, along with the dark complected man, we know from the testimony of Lee Bowers, of course, that he saw 3 cars driving through the parking lot behind the grassy knoll. And in the second car, he was very explicit in seeing the driver driving with one hand and talking on a walkie-talkie or some kind of communications device with his other hand. So, to me, it's all the pieces start fitting together. Now, Collins Radio was about, I forget how far north of Dallas it was, probably a little bit too far to have signals without repeaters. But I think that's probably what Harvey was doing in Dallas for however long he was there, was setting up the communication centers in Dealey Plaza and then making sure that they also had some kind of a communications channel with Collins Radio, which of course was the primary military contractor of the CIA. And as you mentioned, Sean, what a great example that the second Oswald, who was arrested in the back door of the Texas Theater and of course, taken away, who's later seen out in the El Chico restaurant parking lot across from Matt Pate's garage, and the license plate is taken down, and then it comes back to someone named Carl Mather, who is not only an employee of Collins Radio, but he's also very, very close friends with Officer J.D. Tippit. His family is consoling the Tippit family, right after the murder happens. So it all becomes, I mean, to me, it seems like there's a darn good chance that that's what William K. Harvey was doing. I don't think he needed to be I think the shooters were the same kind of shooters that were in Chicago 3 weeks earlier. I think they were anti-Castro Cuban
Or
marksmen.
The OAS and Trey could have been a such, they could be.
And so that's kind of where I'm at on that subject.
Now, doesn't David Adlai Phillips also have a connection to Collins Radio? I think he had a relationship with Arthur Collins, I believe.
He really did. And I haven't done as much research on that as I really should do. So I don't want to comment too much on it, but I know he did have a good, close relationship. Yes.
Now, you mentioned Lee Bowers before. Now, Lee Bowers to me is one of the key witnesses in this whole thing because he had such a view where he was stationed behind the rail yard there, and he's seen all these things. And he testified before the Warren Commission, but then later on he died in a suspicious car accident. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I just totally agree with you. Lee Bowers, I think, is really the key witness in the whole JFK assassination because what he saw was, and I believe he saw more than he actually admitted to. I think he was threatened pretty quickly, and that I don't think he really actually revealed everything that he knew. But what he did say, first of all, we mentioned the cars coming through the parking lot behind the grassy knoll. So we have all that story from him. But we also know that he heard two shots, and that were just about on top of each other. So he's in his interview with Mark Lane. He does such a good job, and he says so the shots were kind of that quick. So that, of course, if there were two shots that he heard, even if they both weren't coming from the grassy knoll area, what it proves is that it certainly wasn't one lone gunman with that couldn't have racked his rifle, that quickly. So, what is interesting about Lee Bowers is that he gave his story not just to the Dallas police, but he was interviewed several times by the FBI. And when he told them that it couldn't have been a single shot because there were two shots on a single shooter because there were two shots on top of each other. He mentions that they said, well, you're not a military, you're not a weapons expert, are you? And he said, oh, I have to agree. Well, of course, why wasn't he asked about that in the Warren Commission? Right when he got to the point where that would have been the next logical question, they pull away and they don't ask him anything about that. So, what we understand from Lee Bowers' wife, from some of the statements that she made later and some of his friends, are that when he says that when he heard the shot and he saw something on the knoll, whether it was a puff of smoke or whether it was a shooter, and he wasn't very clear. And what we can intimate from that is that maybe he saw a little bit more and that he really was someone that the conspirators were definitely afraid of. Because don't forget, people have to remember that the conspirators had just pulled off, literally a coup d'etat. They had literally pulled off a murder of the president, a change of the government. So they were definitely afraid for a extended period of time. Even though they had gotten away with it, I think they were afraid that they were going to get, that people were going to put two and two together. And I think that's why Lee Bowers, he's traveling home from just past Midlothian, Texas, and the story is so incredible. He said in the ambulance that he thought he got drugged when he stopped for coffee just a little while back in Midlothian. I can't say the word. And then the doctor in the ambulance said that he thought he seemed to be in a strange state of shock that the doctor had never seen before. So It seems that, when we look at the progression of how many key witnesses somehow, experienced early deaths, that, we have to ask ourselves, was Lee Bowers murdered?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I definitely, going back to Collins Radio, I definitely agree with you. Collins Radio would have been the place to set up the communications. They had such ties to, military communications equipment. And also, didn't they had a tie into D.H. Byrd as well, didn't they?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Collins Radio, didn't they have a tie into D.H. Byrd, the oil man from Dallas?
I believe they did. I have read that.
With his
I don't-
brother, wasn't it with his brother? They supplied the
Right.
communications with his brother for his
That's
brother.
right. Yeah, and it's pretty tough to not believe that all of those military contractors and oilmen, that was just a social club. They
Yeah.
all they were socially, they were together, business wise they were together. So it's difficult to believe that they weren't all interspersed, at least to some degree. Just the same way, I just interviewed Peter Janney, who was uh, has done really good work on the whole the Mary Myers story, of course, and the dean, and he was being a CIA brat in Georgetown, along with all the other CIA kids. He does such a good job of relaying to us how everybody there was just so interspersed. They partied together every
Yeah.
weekend. So so in some ways, that's one of the ways that, when people say, well, how could you ever gotten away with it for so long? Well, that's part of the reason, they
Sure.
they were all
Well,
together, basically.
and like you said, Harvey would have been the perfect guy because that's what he did. The ZR rifle. I mean, this is what he did. And like you said earlier, he has no explanation as a section chief of Rome, Italy. There's no explanation to be in Dallas, and he has no explanation to use phony FAA credentials because we had Jefferson Morley on talking about this. And the chief of stations usually have their cover set up through the State Department. There's no explanation for a chief of station to need what's called a flash ID like he had with the
Right.
FAA. And then the other thing is, you mentioned the travel vouchers. Well, you have to wonder what information is under the phony credentials that Harvey was traveling under. Like we need that information as well, not just Harvey's travel vouchers. We need that fake name that he was using. I forget the name exactly
Right.
out of my head, but we need that information as well.
Yeah. And he applied for it. What was it? It was that same year he got it, right? I mean, it was in the summer or something.
It was in 63. It was after he meets with Roselli, and then the FBI sees him picking up Roselli at the airport.
Yeah.
They tell their supervisors who get back to the CIA, who gets back to James Angleton, and James Angleton basically says, "There's nothing to see there. Don't worry about it." He protects William Harvey,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
very interesting.
Right.
Another story I want you to tell is the story on Sergeant Robert Vinson.
Hmm.
That's a fascinating. I don't know, Bill. I don't know if you ever heard this story, but this is a fascinating story.
No.
I believe this story, and I know it sounds a little bit incredible to people, but if you really watch the interviews with Sergeant Vinson, if you read his book, if you listen to the people that knew him in his life, this is a really, really solid guy. And the story is he was in Washington D.C. He hadn't received a promotion in a while, and he was doing really, really good work. He was working out of Colorado. He was in Washington, D.C. He was looking to deadhead back to Colorado, and there were no flights that were going back. So the dispatchers said, stick around, we'll let you know if anything comes up. And they did page him, and they said there is a flight that's going out, and there it is, and he walks out anyway. And it's really strange from the beginning because there's no U.S. Air Force, there's no markings on the plane except for what would be the CIA logo that he would later find out. Well, he gets on the plane, he's the only one on there, and he walks by a guy that's doing a pre-flight check. The guy doesn't say anything to him. He gets on the plane. It's really weird. It's not like nothing he's ever experienced. He sits down. A few minutes later, the guy that was doing the pre-flight check, along with another guy, come on. They walk up the aisle. They don't say anything to him. They don't say, "Where you headed? Who are you?" No pleasantries. They don't sign a log book, which is unbelievable. There's no flight engineer on the plane. They go up, they get in the cockpit, they take off, and they're heading west. So Sergeant Vincent doesn't, he thinks this is kind of weird, but he doesn't think too much of it. Well, at about, let's see, the shots in Dallas happened at 12:29, I guess, according to the clock. So at 12:30, 1 minute afterwards, there is an announcement from the cockpit that says President Kennedy has been shot. And that's all that it says. It doesn't say anything more, whether he's alive or dead or even where he was shot, anything about it. But the plane, Sergeant Vincent notices that the plane right away is banking south very hard. And he realizes in about an hour or so that it's coming up to the city of Dallas because he's been there many times. He knows the skyline, and he says that it lands in what is kind of a pre-construction hard-packed area by the Trinity River. And it's kind of a rough landing, but not all that bad. And it pulls up next to kind of an equipment shack. There's a Jeep there with 3 people in it. 2 people get out of it and get on the plane. Again, neither of them says anything to him. Totally strange. They sit in the top seat behind the cockpit, and the plane takes off. He thinks, of course, they're still going to Colorado, but they end up landing at Roswell Air Force Base, where everybody deplanes right away. And he's left on it, where he doesn't know whether they're coming back to take him to Colorado or whatever. So it's really weird. He finally gets off the plane. He sees a light in the distance. He goes up. He sees the military guy there, and he says, "Well, where am I?" He says, "You're at Roswell Air Force Base." He says, "Well, I don't know what I'm doing here. I got to get home, but the base is closed down. He's not allowed to make any communications until about midnight, and then he takes a bus to Colorado, where he thinks it's really weird." Well, that weekend, of course, there's all of the communications, television coverage, and he realizes that one of the guys that got on the plane, he says to his wife, was Lee Oswald. He says, "This is the guy. This is the guy that I saw," and so that ties right into the second Oswald that was at the Texas Theater, arrested, let go, is seen by Mac Payton, all of those folks there. And then if he would have proceeded to about 5 to 10 minutes away to the Trinity River and got on that plane, that would have been him. Okay. Now, what's really interesting is that after that, they agree not to say anything about it because they don't know what's going on, his wife and him. But his life is totally taken over by the CIA. First, he's brought to Washington and he's made these really, really lucrative offers to work for the CIA. and he doesn't know why, because he doesn't have any specific skills that would necessarily translate. But anyway, they don't want to live in Washington. They want to live in Colorado. They've got plans for him. So anyway, he turns them down after about 3 or 4 offers. Well, after that, not very long after, he's told that he is now going to be in Las Vegas and he doesn't have any choice. Well, he ends up working at Area 51. So he works out there all week and then comes back and forth on the weekends. Basically, his life is totally controlled by the CIA for the next, whatever it is, 8 years or so until he finally retires. And then after that, and after the House Select Committee and other committees, uh, after he realizes that he's no longer under confidentiality agreements, he tells his story, and he goes through all the proper channels, and that's how we know the whole story about Sergeant Vinson. So it's really, really interesting, and it fits in pretty perfectly with the whole second Oswald scenario that we know through affidavits was arrested in the Texas theater.
Because we know that couldn't have been Oswald on the plane. So we know that. We know it was a person. And one of the things you said on your channel that I think was perfect is you were talking about all these imposters and all these sightings of Oswald, and they happened after November 2nd, which is interesting because that would have been the Chicago plot. So there's no reason for these Oswalds if the Chicago plot is successful. And wasn't the first sighting, I believe, wasn't it the night of that after the plot was failed, basically? And then the first imposter sighting of Oswald is November 2nd, I believe. And talk about that a little bit.
Well, we know that from J. Edgar Hoover that someone was using Oswald's name in 1960 while he was supposedly fake defecting to the Soviet Union.
Right.
But after that, I've done a lot of original work on two areas. One was Ruth and Michael Paine, which is the majority of my work, and then secondly, the Chicago plot. The Chicago plot, I still don't understand why people don't get more interested in it, because it really was, in my opinion, it really was where Kennedy was supposed to be killed. That was the number one area. It was the day, November 2nd, the day of the Army Air Force football game. He was on his way from Soldier Field to O'Hare Airport to Soldier Field. He would have been if he was there. But what happened was there were four dark-complected shooters I should go back just a little bit. There were two tips that were given. One given by a man named Lee, who I contend was Lee Oswald, because I think that's what he was doing, was he was infiltrating some of these anti-Castro groups that had gone wacky. But a lady and J. Edgar Hoover tells the Secret Service. So the Secret Service, they get a tip from a rooming house, a woman running a rooming house. She's seen four dark-complected guys with long rifles and maps of the motorcade route. Now, so they begin to be followed, those four guys. Well, that night, two of them, a guy named J. Lloyd Stocks, I think was his name. What happened was he's following them closely, and they pulled down an alley, but they realized they're in an alley, two of them, and so they turn around and they start coming back. And just at that time, bad timing, he gets a call on his radio, and they hear it. So his cover is blown. So he has to take them into custody. And so he does. And so there's two of them. They go into separate rooms and they're questioned all night. Okay. Just as an aside, I tried like heck, including FOIA acts, requests and everything else. They won't release, or they say they don't know who these two men that were questioned all night and then released the next day. Why would they be released? But they say that's not available. Anyway, two of the shooters, two of the dark complected guys are still at large. And there's another tip that a guy named Thomas Valley, who was kind of a splitting image of Lee Harvey Oswald. He's even worked at a CIA base in Japan. His background, even the way he looks, everything about him, he's been set up kind of that way. So the CIA brings in two Chicago detectives who are CIA related. So these guys follow him all night. but they don't arrest him. They don't arrest him until after it's announced that JFK will not come to Chicago. Well, why would he be arrested after that? It doesn't make any sense. He should have been arrested before that to get him off the street.
Sure.
So we go through that, and it's so late that the press plane actually takes off in Chicago and lands, but Kennedy isn't there. Now, what happens that same day, of course, is that the DM brothers are kidnapped and murdered in South Vietnam. So the coup d'etat was supposed to happen, and all of that stuff was supposed to happen on the same day. And we know, of course, NASAM 263 was reversed 4 days after the shots rang out, the 273. So we know all of that stuff was so important. They wanted that Vietnam War. That was, in my opinion, that is the single most reason that John Kennedy was assassinated. I think all the other stuff might have, played in a part, but if they were going to get that Vietnam War, I don't think he would have ever been assassinated. Anyway, so that's what happens. Now, the really important part out of all this is that James Rowley, who was the head of the CIA, what does he do? This is insane.
Secret Service, it means. Head of Secret Service.
Yeah, head of Secret Service. I'm so sorry.
That's right.
He orders all the Secret Service agents in Chicago that worked on the case not to write written reports. He instructs them to give oral reports to the department secretary, and then for Maurice Martineau, who was the station chief in Chicago, to collect them and send them to him under a secret routing system that they have. So basically what James Rowley, head of the Secret Service, did was bottle up any information that a plot to kill President Kennedy had taken place, so that some of the Secret Service agents in Dallas just 3 weeks later never even knew that the Chicago plot had happened, and there's more that's kind of involved in it. Kennedy, of course, knew right away that that his ambassador to South Vietnam, what was his name? I can't even think of his name.
Lodge.
Yes. And that he's recalled right away with the intent of firing him as soon as he got back from the Dallas trip. And, so all of that stuff takes place, but it is just incredible. So what happens, as Sean was saying now, what happens is that all of a sudden, all of these fake imposters start showing up in Dallas, even the afternoon and evening of November 2nd, when we start having the visits to the auto dealership where the fake Lee Oswald takes Al Bogart out for the 75 to 80. And Alfred Bogart, Alfred Bogart says in his affidavit, his inquiry, that they went 75 to 85 miles per hour, okay? But then when you look at the Warren report says 65 to 75 miles per hour. I know that's really little, right? But it's just one example of how the Warren Commission did everything possible to change any kind of evidence that would interfere with the whole lone nut theory. So, and then we have all of these imposters showing up. We have the sports drone sighting centers in Grand Prairie, Texas, right? And who lives in Grand Prairie, Texas, but Michael Paine, because he supposedly estranged from Ruth Paine, and he's living out there very next to the sports drone rifle range. And as a matter of fact, there's a sighting of someone that's supposedly handing a rifle over the fence to that Lee Oswald lookalike that was described as being Michael Paine. Whether that's true or not, we don't really know. But the key is that on 2 successive weekends, this wacko is doing all kind of crazy stuff to draw attention to himself at the Sportsdrome shopping center, Sportsdrome rifle range. And he's also, he goes on that car ride at the Lincoln Mercury dealership. He's seen at other places, just calling attention to himself.
Yeah, get attention.
Always mentioning that he's a Marine, he's going to go back to Russia to buy a car and all of this crazy stuff. Well, we would never would have had any of that if Kennedy had been killed in Chicago. It was like they knew that was going to be the last desperate effort to get Kennedy, and they weren't going to let it go. That's just my opinion, but I think that was going to be the place where they got him no matter what.
What's interesting about Chicago, Ted, is that the Chicago FBI has the FBI Chicago office. William Harvey was in the same office with Bob Mayhew, with Jim McCord, who would go on to be CIA, with Guy Bannister, who we know was in New Orleans with Oswald. They were in the same FBI office.
That's right.
Overlaps. So it's interesting to know if we ever get those travel records, was Harvey in Chicago before he was in Dallas? Would have been a question, because if he set up the communications in Dallas, no reason to think he wouldn't be doing the same thing in Chicago, especially with his ties to the city that he has.
Quite possible. That's right. People don't realize that Harvey was actually in the FBI for 8 years or so before he 47 and became, went over to the CIA. And I think the reason he went over was his drinking. If I'm not sure,
but I also think Alan Dulles, he had a close relationship with Alan Dulles too. Dulles poached a lot of them guys. It's interesting. Bob Mayhew, that must have been one heck of an office, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, geez, what a lineup they had there.
So yeah, it's interesting stuff. It really is. Did you, just as an aside, did either of you guys see the ABC presentation?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh, Sean saw it. Yeah, I didn't bother.
That's terrible. I told Bill not to watch it after like 2 minutes in. I knew as soon as I saw Dale Myers, I knew this is going to be a whitewash, because I knew, what they're going to do there. It was terrible.
That guy's been spewing that BS for so long.
Oh, terrible. He's awful. He's awful.
Hey, Sean, before we move on, I just want to mention our sponsor, one of our sponsors, DK's Corner, located in Jessup, Pennsylvania, right on Cherry Street, 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania. Sean, I had a cheesesteak, and I know the ads always mention the cheesesteaks, and we've had a few listeners comment on that. I actually just had one yesterday, and
I thought you were on a diet.
I am. But I had to, well, the thing is, at work now, we've been ordering from DK's, and I keep smelling, everybody's ordering these cheesesteaks, and I keep smelling them. So yesterday I broke down, and I had to have one.
It's all right.
It's just, I'll tell you what, Sean, just delish. I love DK's Corner cheesesteaks. Dave makes everything himself there. Everything is so fresh. All the food he makes is just incredibly delicious. It's such a really a great menu too. I mean,
it is, Bill. He gets really creative with a lot of the specials he has.
Yeah.
He has really good stuff, and his pizza's fantastic, but he always has incredible specials, Bill.
And there's always different things there that, you always have to make sure you check, go on, look on Facebook, DK's Corner on Facebook, because he's always got different specials, different things. He's
constantly changing the menu.
Constantly. And that's what, keeps it fresh, keeps everything good. So he has breakfast. He has these breakfast bowls in the morning. They're delicious. Everything, like I said, everything he makes is great. He's got kind of a unique cooler in there with different sodas and stuff like that, different drinks. So make sure you call or stop by in Jessup. Again, it's 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania. If you're local here in Northeast Pennsylvania, make sure that you stop by and check out DK's Corner. Again, just delicious food, Sean. I know you order from there a lot too.
I order constantly from there, Bill, and so many times that I sent people there. My brother went there, loved it. I had other people. Nathan loves it there. It's just a great place. Sometimes I take it out. Sometimes I even sit there. It's really comfortable. But we get so many people, Bill, listeners and stuff, that said, "Oh, I went to DK's and it was great." I can't tell you how many people. We just had a question episode where people were talking about it. Just unbelievable place. So definitely check that out.
All right, definitely check out DK's Corner. Go to Facebook, look up DK's Corner. Again, he's located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania. DK's Corner.
We will be right back.
Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. We've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. We have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there? A $3 tier?
$3, there's a $5, there's a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give $50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. Once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of however you want to do it, however you want to join, and we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure, but we definitely appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up, and it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and making
supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members, and then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, look for our logo, and just fill in the information and you can join. All right. That's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you.
But let's talk about, let's change subjects a little bit, and let's talk about Ruth and Michael Paine, because you did some fantastic work on those two. And start with either one, whoever you want to start with, but they're fascinating characters.
Well, Ruth is, Ruth Paine is, I think the Paines are the key, one of the keys to really understanding the whole JFK assassination, in the sense of, if you really follow them, you can kind of see what was happening.
Sure.
I was trying to get a sit down videotaped interview with Ruth Paine way back in like 2012 or 13 or something. And she strung me along for about 3 months, where we kept having these extensive email exchanges and telephone conversations, but she wouldn't quite commit to sitting down to the interview. And I started to see what was going on. She was I was starting to have some stuff published in some other areas at that time. So I think she saw me as someone that would be a good person to control. And I think so. I realized that that's what she was doing, that she wouldn't sit down for any interviews with anybody unless it was someone that she felt she could control. And the litmus test really came with the General Walker shooting, which she asked me, flat out if I thought Lee Oswald was the guy that shot at General Walker. And I went through all the evidence that I knew and said, no, I don't. I definitely don't think it was Lee Oswald. None of the witnesses saw anybody that looked like Lee Oswald. I mean, the whole thing. And she got really upset with me at that point and kind of cut off any chance of having a sit down interview where I could ask her questions that I didn't think anybody had ever asked her before. So that's when I realized that Ruth Paine, I didn't have much doubt, but that was the point where I realized this woman is, CIA controlled
Oh yeah.
right from the get-go. And then I started doing all the real heavy research into her whole life, and most people know about it. It was basically her husband, Michael, both the Paines and the Forbes, very wealthy,
Yeah.
Nulshana Island, Alan Dulles and his mistress, Mary Bancroft,
Bancroft.
also an American spy, would get together there, and they all knew Michael very, very well.
Ruth's
Ruth
sister
Paine's
was CIA.
Exactly. Ruth Paine's father was intelligence, and
Yeah.
we have the application where he applied to the CIA. What's really interesting is her sister Sylvia Hoke, who Ruth spent at least a week, and I forget how long it was, but it was at least a week in Falls Church, Virginia, right before she left to pick up Marina Oswald to take her to Dallas. Sylvia Hoke and her husband, who was worked for the what's the name of that organization? A CIA based organization. But Sylvia
Was it
Hope,
aid? Wasn't it aid? They were. Was it
yes,
aid?
exactly.
Yeah.
Sylvia Hope not only was a psychologist for the CIA from 1952 on, but she worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence before that, which most people aren't aware of. So just intelligence all the way through. So, now that was the other thing that Ruth lied to me about, just blatantly lied, when I kept trying to get her to tell me that her sister Sylvia worked for the CIA. She would never admit that to me. She would say, no, I think she was just a secretary. And I swear to God to you, this is what she said to me. I think she was just a secretary and she did things like transcriptions for people that were trying to learn English. It was unbelievable, these lies she was spewing out to me when I already knew the truth.
She
That was
got
what
Alan Dulles a cup of coffee. That's what her job
man,
was.
and the difference is that now Ruth Paine, most people, if you ever have ever read the Warren Commission report, if you've ever tried to get through that damn thing, but she was asked more questions than anyone else because she was so good. Her husband, Michael Paine, was asked almost nothing because they were really afraid of what he was going to say. And so, but Ruth, right from the beginning, she's introduced to the Oswalds at the Everett D. Glover party on uh, February 22nd, 1963, exactly 9 months before the assassination.
Right.
She doesn't even talk to Marina at that party, according to her own words and what she testified to. Barely speaks to her, but all of a sudden then starts showing up, sending her letters, showing up unannounced at her home in Dallas, and she shows up unannounced a couple of times, invites them to dinner over at her house. And then she shows up really interestingly on the exact day that Lee and Marina are moving to New Orleans. His assignment at Jaeger Child Stovall has ended, and he is assigned by intel, and this is my opinion now, but he's assigned by intelligence to his next assignments in New Orleans. Well, she shows up exactly that day. It's true that they needed a place to stay and, and that kind of thing. So he was really okay with Marina spending a few days with Ruth Paine at that point while he got settled. It ended up being 10 days. Now, instead of this is just goes to show you to the extent that Ruth Paine was trying to infiltrate the Oswald's life. When it's time for Marina to get on the bus after 10 days and go to uh, New Orleans to be with Lee, what happens is that Ruth insists that she will drive her rather than get on the bus. Now, that's incredible because Ruth has two really small children at that point. It's really a 2-day trip over. It's at least an overnight trip from Dallas to New Orleans in those days. And then she spends 5 days in New Orleans when she gets there, right? She doesn't drop her off. She spends 5 days there with her, right? So, and it's at that point that she starts writing all the letters, come live with me, and da 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 da, and the whole thing. And we all know that story. And then as we move along, I did a video called 32 Steps
Yeah.
that Ruth Paine did or took to set up Lee Oswald as the patsy. And if you just go through the chronology of it, it's just unbelievable what she would do. She says that she copied a letter that Lee Oswald was writing to the Soviet embassy. She copied it in her handwriting, right? And so and it's involving Valery Kostakov, the famous Soviet assassin, and then all the way down until the end where even though everything in her house has been searched a million times,
the police can't find it, but then she
yeah. She finds
Mexico City.
The trinkets in Mexico City, the CIA's in all kind of trouble because they're sending the fake pictures and voicemail of Lee Oswald to the FBI on the night of the afternoon of the assassination. Well, it's Ruth Paine that comes up with these Mexico City trinkets to tie him to Mexico City when nobody else has found them in that drawer, And then later on at the end, she's returning the book to the Dallas police and that they were going to turn over to Marina, and inside is the General Walker letter, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. She's the one that gets Lee the job at the Texas School Book Depository,
Right.
She's the one, even though Lee's stuff the boxes and duffel bags have been searched multiple times in the weeks following the assassination. All of a sudden, that Imperial reflex camera that took the backyard photos is found in her garage 2 weeks after the assassination. Unbelievable, right. Unbelievable. And there's so much stuff. It's just.
Well, when you talked about when the Paines met Oswald, to me that was like an intelligence handoff because George de Mohrenschildt was handling him, and of course de Mohrenschildt has a relationship going back with Allen Dulles to when he was 10 years old, and Dulles was a lawyer at Sullivan Cromwell dealing with de Mohrenschildt's father. But it was weird that the White Russians would take in Oswald, who's allegedly a communist, because that's the opposite. They hate the communists.
Yeah.
So de Mohrenschildt is going to Haiti, which is a whole other rabbit hole of what he was doing going to Haiti, and he basically hands off, Oswald to the Paines is what really happened at that party.
Exactly, and de Mohrenschildt goes to Haiti with Papa Doc de Volier, and he gets what $350,000, I think it was. And
Mitchell Morbella's over there at that time doing all kind of nasty stuff, and yeah, it's crazy.
And another thing that's really important about Ruth Paine is that the afternoon of the assassination, two things really. Number one, well, the afternoon of the assassination, Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters takes 6 or 7 small filing cabinets out of her home that are filled with pro-Castro sympathizers.
Right.
So it's almost assured absolutely true that Ruth and Michael were, were intelligence assets at that point,
Sure.
and then the other thing that's there was a wiretap on Ruth Paine's home, and at exactly 1 o'clock, there's that famous wiretapped call from Michael Paine at the helicopter
Right.
where he's saying to Ruth, and this is even before Oswald has ever been. Um, nobody's ever said the word Lee Oswald at this point. This is before Tippett's dead. This is before the Texas Theater. This is before everything. But Michael Paine says that Lee Oswald is going to be blamed for the murder, but they both know who's really responsible. And of course,
Right.
that's the CIA. They'll lie about that and say, they weren't talking about the CIA, but
Oh, no.
of course they were. So interesting stuff with the
And their
Paines.
tax records are still classified,
Oh,
right?
that's a great point. Still classified as far as I know. And Jim Garrison was the one that originally tried to get those tax
Right.
files. Why would those, especially now that she's just passed on, why would those tax files,
I think you know why.
even if it was just the ones that showed if she was being paid either by an intelligence agency or a known front for an
Sure,
intelligence agency.
sure.
So
It's unbelievable.
it really is.
You know what? Let's go, Bill. You got anything? Because I want to go on to something else.
No, keep going, Sean. This is great.
Um, one of another great thing you did, Ted, is you were talking about the shooters and a lot of these. I get so aggravated with the disinformation artists and these guys that come out and so many guys admit they were the ones that shot Kennedy and all this crap. And one of the ones that drive me crazy is James Files, and it just drives me nuts. And I still get questions. People ask me about it. What do I think of Files? I think Files is a complete liar. I don't believe anything. I don't believe he was a kid basically, and his whole story doesn't make any sense. He's talking about the day of the assassination. They still weren't sure what they were going to do. I mean, the whole story's garbage. But talk to me about James Files.
Well, I just totally agree with you, Sean. I just think it's all garbage. I think that he's a disinformation agent. I don't know. He's probably, I'm sure he was involved with the Chicago mob and he knew enough that
Well, it looks
he's
like he knew Nicoletti.
yeah,
He might
exactly.
even down the road. There's evidence he might even know David Allie Phillips.
Mhm.
But the thing is, at the time of the assassination, he's what, like 19 years old or something like
Right.
that? The kid.
Yeah, I think he's 20 years old, and the first thing that he says, which makes no sense, is that well, if you get through when he's told about the whole killing Kennedy, that's even more bizarre. But he says to Dallas, and he says he gets a knock on the door the morning after he's there, and who is it but Lee Harvey Oswald, right? And then Lee Oswald basically spends the whole week with him, and they're doing some testing of some rifles and some other things. And well, the thing is that Lee Oswald is working at the Texas School Book Depository that whole week. And he's clocked in, right?
Right.
And nobody has seen him not be there. And then when Files is finally caught on that, he says, well, every day I would drop him off somewhere near Dilley Plaza. I didn't really know where he was going. That was his exact words. Well, that makes no sense at all. So you got that. Then, his whole story about the mafia going through with the shooting even after it's called off.
Yeah.
Just totally ridiculous. Everything Lee Bowers saw, none of it corresponds with this idiot. And then it gets so bizarre that when some researchers find that he's in Chicago, the day of the actual assassination, he actually says that he had a twin brother that was in Chicago and that he eventually had to kill for some kind of crazy reasons, right? All right, so then I did that video on Files, and James Manning. Do you know who James Manning is?
A little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't know much about him, but Files has been appearing on his show, right? Well, just at that time, Files comes out and says, no, it wasn't Ted Kennedy that killed Mary Jo Kopechne. It was me. I went up there with somebody, I forget who he said, and I actually strangled Mary Jo Kopechne, killed her, put her back in the car, and we did all that to threaten Teddy Kennedy. Well, I mean, who's he going to kill next? I mean, he's going to kill Abraham Lincoln next. The whole story is it's just so bogus
Right.
that it becomes funny if you really actually take time to break it down. In those jailhouse interviews, and I listened to him closely, he never said one thing that wasn't in the public domain. He never said one iota of information that nobody else knew. He manipulated it a little bit. He would say, "Oh, I had a conversation with so and so," but who knows? That there's nothing to prove any of that. So, Files is one of those guys that I always thought of him like having a beer and laughing at people that actually believe that
It's amazing how many
story.
people actually believe him, though.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I get mean emails from people from that, still believe him.
Oh
And
yeah.
plus he says if he was so anxious to get the story out there, Oliver Stone was trying to get his, and he wouldn't, he says that, oh no, I wouldn't work with Oliver Stone because I didn't like the man. That was his story. Well, that's so idiotic. If he was really trying to get the story out there, what better way would there have been than to talk to somebody like Oliver Stone? So yeah, I think I feel sorry for the folks that still believe James Files. He's a wacko.
And it's the same with a lot of these guys who admit this, because I think at this point the waters have been so muddied, it's really hard to say who the shooters were. But I think, if somebody's asking you, to put you on the spot, I think, the most likely it would have been the anti-Castro Cubans that were being trained out of JM Wave in Miami,
Yeah.
or the OAS with Sutre, who have a long relationship with Alan Dulles. I think those would have been the two likely teams that would have been. But it's impossible to, you know, but. I want to talk about one more name that comes up, Herminio Diaz. Did
Yeah.
you see the latest information, though, on the file? Because Jefferson Morley asked for information on Diaz, and when it came back, the file came back that James Angleton was vetting assassins for, the ZR rifle program to assassinate Fidel Castro when Diaz was one of the persons they were vetting. But the fact that Angleton was involved in that process I think is really important when you think about he's the one that protected Harvey with the FBI. Also, we know he's controlling Oswald's files. He's involved with his 201 file. He's manipulating it, the whole Mexico City thing. And now we know Angleton's involved in, the vetting of assassins. I think that's really important.
I totally agree. And I do think that he was one of the shooters. That's probably the only one that I'm fairly and again, I have no knowledge of this, but it makes perfect sense. He was just out there, and he eventually got killed in Cuba a few years after that. But if you
Wasn't
look
it
at
Escalante? Didn't Fabian Escalante
yes,
say that
yes,
he was one of the shooters?
Yep.
Of course, he was Cuban intelligence.
Exactly. And everything he did was assassination related. He was such a zealot that he was easily manipulated. He had a lot of skills. So I think he was one of the perfect people that would have been a shooter in Dealey Plaza. Not only that, but he was someone that could be totally trusted, whether he was someone that they wanted to get rid of later or whether or not, it really wouldn't have mattered because he wasn't going to go tell anybody. He had already done, a million things before that. So I think I'm glad you brought him up. I have no idea who the shooters were. I think he was the one guy that I think was a shooter. The other guy that I think was in Texas was
Right.
Gene Suter.
Sutre, I think it's pronounced Sutre, but I know who you're
Sutre.
talking about. Definitely, yeah. He was supposedly in Dallas, and he would have been. And
Right.
what you mentioned there with the skills, that's an important point because a lot of times they say these guys were shooters and stuff, and these mafia guys like that shoot people in the back of the head. They were not talking about that type of skill
No,
set. We're talking about a sniper, a rifle. That's a
that's right.
specific skill set, and guys like Sutre and Diaz had that skill set.
Right.
When you talk about, they throw in Nicoletti's name a lot. Nicoletti, there's nothing in his background that he had that type of skill set, so
Yeah.
that's an important point. This was a sniper.
Right. And I think people they put so much interest and emphasis on who the actual shooters were. That's the least important thing out of
Least,
the whole
least important.
assassination. Who put them there? That's the only thing that really matters. So,
One thing I want to talk to you about Kennedy specifically,
mm.
with all the problems we got today, with healthcare and everything, what do you think John Kennedy would have done as to protect, healthcare for all Americans?
Well, this is a subject that really bothers me because I think it's just a tragedy, a travesty that healthcare the is being used as a just a political point, and really you're taking away health care from so many people, especially in rural areas that have no other options. I mean, my God, it makes no sense to me. I mean, people can say what they want about John Kennedy as far as, maybe his personal whatever, and but he was, I think if you listen to the American University speeches and you actually look at what he was trying to do as far as develop a détente with the Soviet Union and the back channels to Fidel Castro, I mean, all of this stuff is and it just makes perfect sense it's common sense. And I think one of the problems that we have now is we have such a lack of oversight in the country that is yeah, it's just through Operation Mockingbird, which really was the beginnings of the control of media by intelligence, especially the CIA. What we've got now is that we've got such a polarized America that people don't realize 90% of people are right in the middle. I think when we all go left or right on certain issues. I certainly do, even though I lean left. But I mean, I think that oh my God. I mean, the healthcare thing is just, it drives me bananas, actually, because it really has the potential to affect millions of people. And we've got a system that is working fairly well at this
Yeah.
point, and seems to be growing every year. Now, if someone did have a plan to replace it with something else, well, why haven't you come up with it in the last 15 years?
Concepts,
Keep
that
There's
saying
concepts of a plan, Ted.
so
Well, I totally agree with you on healthcare. I mean, and it's a shame that how many countries in the world have universal healthcare, and here in the United States is such a mess. I mean, it's really a disaster. And like you said, the rural areas are going to be hit. I mean, such a travesty. But a lot of the things that John Kennedy was going to do, I mean, that murder really, I don't think the country ever recovered from that
yeah,
assassination. It went downhill. The mistrust in government, really starts with the Warren Commission and then goes on to Watergate and Vietnam and just all the things that were reversed after Kennedy's death. The things that he was doing, to help people and just travesties all over the place. But such a terrible murder, the impact of that. And I think we're still feeling it today.
Definitely. Yep.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's exactly the way I feel. It would have been a whole different America, I think, if he had lived, because I think it was the start of really, I think it was the start of placing good in front of evil. And I think, well, I mean, sometimes it comes to me, it seems like now, and I know I'll get a bunch of emails for this, but, I think that we have an administration that is just corrupt to the very soul. I think we're at a
Agreed.
point where anybody that doesn't stand up and say, this can't stand. This is ridiculous. This isn't America. This is just trying to benefit one segment of America and pit groups against each other rather than trying to actually do good for America. And it'll be the happiest moment of my life, the day that I don't have to hear Donald Trump's name mentioned
We'll be
anywhere
right
in the
there with you.
news.
Yeah,
We'll be
Ted,
right
it's
there
not,
with
they're not even trying to hide it. It's not like it's happening behind the scenes. It's just happening right out in the open, the corruption. So, there's no second guessing. There's no thinking. We know that it's happening.
corruption with incompetence, though. When you put those two things together, you got a really bad recipe for disaster.
Yep. That's where
The
we
thing
are.
that scares me is I think Donald Trump is one of the dumbest human beings that I've ever, come across. So I don't have any doubt that he's not coming up with this stuff.
No,
It's all the
no.
people behind him, of course. And that's what's really dangerous. They've got this stooge that's out in front and is pretty much narcissistic to the core.
Right.
I mean, the stuff that he does is just, having his cabinet go around the room, to have to, praise him. I mean, what kind of a human being does that? I
Like a
mean,
child. He's like a child.
Yeah.
it is. He's a child. I mean, I know his niece, Mary Trump, when I used to hear her before he was elected, and it was difficult for me to believe some of the stuff that she was saying about, growing up with that guy. But now I don't even think she went far enough. I
Right.
mean,
I heard somebody, Ted, say that, what they do, and you described it exactly. It's all of these stooges, these guys behind the scenes manipulating him. And what they essentially do is say, okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this. Great ideas, Mr. President. I mean, fantastic. This is all great stuff. And he's, oh yeah, the thing, yeah, yeah. And then he takes credit for it, of course. And it's all horrible stuff. But
how can you? Who did he just pardon? The guy from what was the guy that had, what was it, 470 tons of drugs or something? I can't
Yeah.
remember the specifics of it, but
yeah,
and yet he's saying that that's why he wants to, bomb Venezuela and
right.
kill people on boats. It's insane and it's sad. And what I think about is that some of these European leaders and other that have to meet with this guy, at some of these conferences. I mean,
Could you imagine?
oh,
I mean, can you imagine what that must be like? I mean, it's got to be just, they have to walk out of there and just laugh hysterically and just say, what a moron.
that's what I was just thinking. They must have to rush to a room and
But
to
did you see the
commiserate
video?
with
Did you
each
guys see the
other.
video? They were laughing. The Canadian, and I forget who else it was, but they were talking. They were at a party, and somebody videotaped them. They were talking about Trump, and they were laughing,
Oh
just
God.
making a joke. Like it's a joke. But when
Yeah.
you talk about behind the scenes, the people. One of the biggest backers of JD Vance is, of course, a guy with ties to Sullivan and Cromwell. Palantir, which is CIA front, and that, of course, is Mr. PayPal, Peter Thiel
Right.
carries a lot of weight, and he's the biggest backer of JD Vance,
Yep.
and he's one of the guys
And
behind
to
the scenes.
me, there's America could improve. Just the gloom and doom aside for a second. One of the things that, and I don't know, maybe it's 12 years of Catholic school that's making me say this. I don't know, but one of the things that I really hope comes out of this whole Trump thing is that things don't always change in the way that we want, and I think that sometimes maybe uh, having someone who's so far to that side of, I'm going to say, evil, that sometimes it might take something like that in order to shake America to realize that we really need to get to a better place. And I think two things could be done. Number one, we have to go back to having oversight over government, all agencies in government. And number two, the most important thing is that we have to have incredible campaign finance reform where we can't let wealthy people buy by our politicians. And it doesn't seem like, hey, if I can come up with that, if I'm smart enough to think about it, then that tells you that it's pretty darn obvious,
That's another thing Kennedy wanted to do was campaign finance reform. We talked to Monica Wiesack about that. She did a lot of great work on that, and that's one of the things he was working on. And of course, it got changed after after he got killed.
Yes.
Yeah. It's going to take decades, Ted. I mean, Sean and I have talked about this. It's going to take decades to recover from what's happening right now, and it's just, I don't even have the words to say it, but. Anyway, Ted, this has been fantastic. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. It's been fun, and thanks for coming on with us.
I love the name of your podcast too. It's great. That's
enough out of you. Well, that's a shot at the media. We had enough of the media. We had enough of Hollywood and all the disinformation artists. That's enough out of you.
Yep.
It's so cool. Well, you guys have been great, and thanks for having me. Let's stay in touch, and
definitely.
I'll let you know anything that I happen to come across, and please do the same. And we'll solve all the problems of the world.
We'll try.
Well, can we get Notre Dame in the playoffs somehow?
Yes.
I think that's one problem we can't solve. But
don't bring that up, Billy.
Sorry,
I'm going to go off on ESPN. So let's not.
All right. Well, you guys have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Good night.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.